The line for the public restroom snaked around the corner, but that didn't faze Karen. With a disdainful huff, she marched right past the dozens of waiting patrons and headed straight for the entrance, ignoring the indignant murmurs and glares directed her way. "Excuse me, the line starts back there," a middle-aged woman called out, gesturing to the end of the queue. Karen shot her a withering look. "I don't have time to wait. I'm in a hurry." "Well, so is everyone else," the woman retorted. "Get to the back of the line like the rest of us." Undeterred, Karen barged past the woman and shoved the restroom door open, disappearing inside. The woman's face flushed with outrage, but before she could react, a stern voice stopped her in her tracks. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Turning, the woman found herself face to face with a police officer, or so she thought. The woman in the crisp, tailored uniform had the bearing of a law enforcement official, but something about her demeanor seemed off. "I beg your pardon," the woman stammered, taken aback. "I said, step aside." The officer's tone was firm, yet there was a subtle undertone of amusement in her voice. "I'll handle this." Bewildered, the woman reluctantly stepped back, watching as the officer strode toward the restroom door. As she reached for the handle, the woman suddenly realized her mistake. "Wait a minute, you're not." But the officer had already slipped inside, leaving the woman to stare after her in puzzlement. Karen emerged from the restroom a few minutes later, feeling refreshed and smugly satisfied with herself. As she headed back toward the exit, she found her path blocked by a tall, imposing figure. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," the officer said, her voice brooking no argument. Karen's eyes widened in alarm. "What? Why?" "You cut in line and disregarded the reasonable requests of the other patrons," the officer replied, her gaze unwavering. "That's disorderly conduct, and I'm placing you under arrest." "You can't do that," Karen protested, her voice rising in pitch. "I'm in a hurry, and I didn't do anything wrong." "That's where you're mistaken." The officer's lips curved into a humorless smile. "You see, I'm an off-duty police officer, and I witnessed the whole thing. Now, are you going to come quietly, or do I need to call for backup?" Karen's face drained of color as the gravity of the situation sank in. She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. Reluctantly, she allowed the officer to guide her toward the exit, the eyes of the other patrons burning into her back as she went. As they stepped outside, the officer produced a pair of handcuffs and began securing Karen's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," she recited, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Karen's heart sank as she realized the full extent of her predicament. What had started as a minor act of entitlement had now spiraled into a humiliating arrest, and she had no one to blame but herself. The ride to the police station was a torturous affair for Karen. Wedged in the back seat of the officer's unmarked car, her wrists still cuffed, she couldn't help but replay the events that had led her to this ignoble position. It had all started so innocuously. She had been in a hurry, needing to use the restroom before her important meeting, and the line had just seemed so long and unnecessary. Surely, a few minutes' delay wouldn't have made that much of a difference, but her innate sense of entitlement had kicked in, and she had simply brushed past the other waiting patrons without a second thought. Now, as she stared out the window at the passing scenery, Karen felt a growing sense of dread. What would her boss say when she arrived late and in handcuffs? How would her family and friends react to the news of her arrest? The impending humiliation and consequences felt unbearable. "You know, it doesn't have to be this way," the officer said suddenly, her eyes meeting Karen's in the rearview mirror. Karen's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I'm an off-duty cop," the officer explained. "I could let you go with a warning if you're willing to take responsibility for your actions and make amends." Karen's heart leaped with hope. "Really? What do I need to do?" First, you need to apologize sincerely to the woman you cut in line, the officer said. Acknowledge that what you did was wrong and that you understand why it upset her. Karen nodded eagerly. I can do that. Anything else? You'll also need to go back and wait your turn in line like everyone else, the officer continued. No more cutting the queue, no matter how much of a hurry you're in. Karen hesitated, the familiar prickle of indignation rising within her. But I'll be late for my meeting. Can't I just? No exceptions, the officer interrupted firmly. If you want to avoid an official arrest and the consequences that come with it, you'll have to follow the rules like everyone else. Reluctantly, Karen acquiesced. Okay, fine. I'll do it. The officer nodded, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Good. Let's head back, then. As the car turned around and headed back toward the public restrooms, Karen felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. She had been given a chance to avoid the humiliation of a formal arrest, but it meant swallowing her pride and submitting to the very rules she had so casually disregarded. Still, the alternative was far worse, and Karen knew she had no choice but to comply. As they pulled up to the restrooms, the officer removed Karen's handcuffs and gestured toward the line. You know what to do. Karen took a deep breath and approached the waiting crowd, her eyes seeking out the woman she had cut in line. This was going to be one of the most difficult things she had ever done, but she knew she had no choice. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the woman she had so brazenly cut in line. The woman eyed her warily, clearly still seething with resentment. I want to apologize, Karen began, her voice trembling slightly. What I did was wrong, and I understand why you were upset. I shouldn't have just pushed my way to the front without waiting my turn like everyone else. The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise, clearly not expecting such a genuine and contrite response. Well, I appreciate you saying that, she said, her tone softening ever so slightly. I'm really sorry, Karen continued, her gaze earnest. I was in a hurry, but that's no excuse. I'll wait my turn from now on, I promise. The woman studied Karen for a moment, then nodded. Okay, apology accepted. Just try to be more considerate of others in the future, all right? Karen nodded emphatically. I will, I swear. With that, Karen took her place at the back of the line, her shoulders slumped in resignation. Part of her wanted to simply leave and find another restroom, but she knew that would only land her in even more trouble. Steeling herself, she settled in, determined to see this unpleasant ordeal through. The minutes ticked by, and Karen found herself shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. The line seemed to be moving at a glacial pace, and her bladder was beginning to protest. But she dutifully remained in her place, her gaze fixed resolutely ahead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the front of the line. With a quiet sigh of relief, she slipped into the restroom, emerging a few minutes later feeling refreshed and, surprisingly, a bit lighter in spirit. As she exited, she found the off-duty officer waiting for her, a faint smile playing on her lips. Well, you did it, the officer said, her tone approving. I'm impressed. Karen managed a sheepish smile. Yeah, well, I didn't really have much choice, did I? The officer's smile widened. True, but you could have made a scene or tried to sneak out the back. Instead, you took responsibility and did the right thing. That's admirable, even if it wasn't easy. Karen felt a flicker of pride at the officer's words. So, what happens now? Well, since you've learned your lesson and made amends, I'm not going to arrest you, the officer replied. But I do have one more condition. Karen's heart sank. What is it? I want you to pay it forward, the officer said. The next time you see someone trying to cut in line or act entitled, I want you to step in and say something. Use your experience to help teach them the same lesson you just learned. Karen hesitated, the familiar prickle of discomfort rising within her. I don't know, I'm not really the confrontational type. I understand your reluctance, the officer said, but consider this. If someone had spoken up when you tried to cut the line, you might not have ended up in this situation in the first place. You have a chance to make a difference, to help someone else avoid the same mistakes you made. Karen considered the officer's words, the truth of them slowly sinking in. With a resigned sigh, she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. I'll try to speak up the next time I see something like that. The officer's smile widened. Good. I'm glad we had this little chat. Now, run along and try to make it to your meeting on time. Karen couldn't help but return the smile, a newfound sense of purpose stirring within her. As she hurried toward her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this experience had changed her in ways she didn't yet fully understand. The rest of Karen's day was a blur of stress and anxiety. She had made it to her meeting, but her mind was still reeling from the humiliating incident at the public restroom. The off-duty officer's words had struck a chord, and she found herself replaying the encounter over and over in her head. As she sat in the conference room, trying to focus on the presentation, her boss's sharp voice suddenly cut through the haze. Karen, are you even listening? Karen jumped, her face flushing with embarrassment. I'm sorry. What were you saying? Her boss frowned, clearly irritated. I was asking for your input on the new marketing strategy, but you seem distracted. Is everything all right? Karen hesitated, torn between the urge to confess the truth and her desire to avoid further embarrassment. I'm fine, really, she said, mustering a weak smile. Just a little. Preoccupied, that's all. Her boss eyed her skeptically, but let the matter drop, and Karen breathed a silent sigh of relief. As the meeting dragged on, she found herself becoming increasingly fidgety, her mind constantly drifting back to the events of the day. By the time the meeting finally ended, Karen was eager to escape the confines of the office. As she hurried toward the elevator, she nearly collided with a coworker, eliciting an exasperated huff. Watch where you're going, Karen, the coworker snapped. Karen opened her mouth to apologize, but the words caught in her throat as the officer's face flashed in her mind. Steeling herself, she squared her shoulders and met the coworker's gaze. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady. That was my fault. I should have been more aware of my surroundings. The coworker's eyebrows shot up in surprise, clearly not expecting such a contrite response from the usually imperious Karen. Oh, well, okay then. No harm done, I guess. Karen nodded, then continued on her way, her steps a little lighter than they had been moments ago. As she stepped outside, she paused, taking a deep breath of the crisp, autumn air. The encounter with the off-duty officer had shaken her, forcing her to confront the ugly truth about her own behavior. She had always prided herself on her efficiency and her ability to get things done, but at what cost? How many people had she trampled on in her quest for personal gain? Suddenly, the officer's words echoed in her mind. Use your experience to help teach them the same lesson you just learned. Karen hesitated, her fingers drumming nervously against her thigh. The thought of confronting someone's entitled behavior made her skin crawl, but the memory of her own humiliation was still fresh in her mind. She knew she couldn't simply ignore the challenge the officer had laid before her. Taking a deep breath, Karen scanned the bustling street, her eyes searching for any signs of someone trying to cut in line or disregard the rules. It wasn't long before she spotted a young man blatantly ignoring the "Wait Here" sign at a crosswalk, pushing his way to the front of the crowd. Karen steeled herself, then strode forward, her voice ringing out with surprising confidence. Excuse me, but the line starts back there, she said, gesturing toward the end of the queue. I'd appreciate it if you'd wait your turn like everyone else. The young man turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. What's it to you, lady? He snapped. Karen felt a flicker of trepidation, but she refused to back down. It's the right thing to do, she said firmly. We all have to follow the rules. Now please, get to the back of the line. The young man glared at her for a long moment, then, with a huff of frustration, He reluctantly shuffled to the rear of the group. Karen watched him go, a sense of satisfaction swelling within her. Perhaps this was the start of a new chapter in her life, one where she was no longer blinded by her own sense of entitlement. With a renewed sense of purpose, Karen headed toward her car, her stride a little more confident than it had been just moments ago. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Karen. Buoyed by her newfound sense of purpose, she found herself keeping a vigilant eye out for instances of entitled behavior, ready to step in and speak up whenever the opportunity arose. At the grocery store, she politely but firmly called out a customer who tried to push past the line at the checkout. In the parking lot, she gently reminded a driver who had taken 2 spots that they were being inconsiderate of others. And at the post office, she patiently waited her turn, even as the person behind her grew increasingly impatient. With each encounter, Karen felt a growing sense of satisfaction and empowerment. She was no longer the entitled Karen who had so brazenly cut in line at the public restroom. She was a woman on a mission, determined to make a difference in her community. But the true test came one day when Karen was rushing to an important meeting, her mind focused on the presentation she had prepared. As she approached the elevator, she found the doors closing, with a woman already inside. Without thinking, Karen darted forward, her hand shooting out to prevent the doors from closing. "Wait, hold the elevator," she called out. The woman looked up, her expression one of annoyance. "I'm sorry, but this elevator is full," she said, her tone clipped. Karen hesitated, her eyes flicking to the floor indicator. Sure enough, the elevator was already at capacity. Swallowing her pride, she took a step back, her gaze meeting the woman's. "You're right, my apologies," she said, her voice calm and even. "I should have waited for the next one." The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise, and a flicker of something akin to respect crossed her features. "Thanks for understanding," she said, as the elevator doors slid shut. Karen stood there for a moment, a small smile playing on her lips. It had been a simple interaction, but it felt like a significant victory. She had resisted the urge to push her way onto the elevator, even though it would have meant making her meeting on time. As she waited for the next elevator, Karen couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed in the past week. The experience with the off-duty officer had been a wake-up call, forcing her to confront the uglier aspects of her own behavior. And now, instead of simply pursuing her own interests, she found herself actively looking for ways to be more considerate of others. When the elevator arrived, Karen stepped inside, her mind already turning to the task at hand. But as the car ascended, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. She was no longer the entitled Karen of the past. She was a new, improved version of herself, one who was willing to put the needs of others before her own. And as she strode into the meeting, her head held high, she knew that this was just the beginning of a profound transformation. Over the next few weeks, Karen's newfound commitment to being more considerate of others continued to pay dividends. She found herself engaging in small acts of kindness and consideration on a daily basis, holding the door for someone, offering her seat on the bus, or letting a driver merge in front of her on the highway. At work, her colleagues began to notice a subtle shift in her demeanor. Gone were the imperious demands and the entitled attitude. Instead, Karen approached her tasks with a renewed sense of focus and a willingness to collaborate. "You seem different lately," her boss remarked one day during a meeting. "More approachable, I guess. What's changed?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then decided to open up. "Well, to be honest, I had a bit of a wake-up call a few weeks ago," she explained. "I realized that I'd been taking a lot of things for granted, and that my behavior was negatively impacting those around me." Her boss listened intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I see. And how did you come to this realization?" Karen recounted the incident at the public restroom, the encounter with the off-duty officer, and her subsequent efforts to pay it forward by speaking up when she witnessed entitled behavior. "Wow, that's quite a story," her boss said, shaking his head. "I have to admit, I'm impressed by your willingness to own up to your mistakes and make a change." "It wasn't easy," Karen admitted. "But I realized that if I wanted to be a better person, I had to start by acknowledging my own flaws and making a conscious effort to improve." Her boss nodded approvingly. "Well, whatever happened, it seems to have had a positive impact. Your work has been excellent, and your interactions with the team have been much smoother. Keep it up, and who knows, maybe this could lead to some new opportunities down the line." Karen felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, I really appreciate that. And I promise, I'm going to keep working on being a better version of myself, both at work and in my personal life." As the meeting adjourned, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had come a long way from the entitled, self-absorbed woman she had once been, and the transformation was proving to be both liberating and rewarding. But even as she basked in this newfound sense of purpose, a nagging doubt crept into her mind. What if this was all just a temporary phase? What if she eventually slipped back into her old habits and ways of thinking? Determined to avoid that fate, Karen resolved to make her newfound commitment to consideration and kindness a permanent part of her life. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to put in the work to ensure that the lessons she had learned would stick. As she walked back to her desk, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. The future may have been uncertain, but one thing was clear. Karen was no longer the same person she had been just a few short weeks ago. Over the next few months, Karen's transformation continued to deepen and evolve. She found herself increasingly drawn to volunteer work, donating her time and resources to various charitable causes in her community. At the local food bank, she would spend hours sorting and packing donations, chatting with the other volunteers, and learning about the challenges faced by those in need. At the animal shelter, she would cuddle and play with the rescue dogs, taking them for walks and helping to prepare them for adoption. These acts of service not only brought Karen a sense of fulfillment, but they also helped to solidify her newfound commitment to kindness and compassion. She found herself thinking less about her own needs and desires, and more about how she could use her time and resources to make a positive impact on the lives of others. One day, as Karen was sorting canned goods at the food bank, a young mother approached her, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Excuse me, I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "My family has been going through a really tough time, and the food we've been able to get here has been a lifesaver." Karen felt a lump rise in her throat as she listened to the woman's story, her heart aching at the thought of the struggles she had endured. "I'm so glad we could help," Karen replied, reaching out to give the woman's hand a gentle squeeze. "Please, don't hesitate to come back any time you need assistance. That's what we're here for." The woman nodded, a tearful smile spreading across her face. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. You have no idea how much this means to us." As the woman walked away, Karen felt a surge of emotion wash over her. In that moment, she realized that her newfound commitment to kindness and consideration wasn't just about avoiding the consequences of her own entitled behavior. It was about making a real, tangible difference in the lives of those around her. With a renewed sense of purpose, Karen threw herself into her volunteer work, finding joy and fulfillment in the simple act of making someone else's life a little bit easier. And as she continued to witness the impact of her actions, she knew that this was just the beginning of a lifelong journey of service and compassion. But even as Karen's heart swelled with pride and purpose, a nagging sense of unease began to creep into her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, some deeper truth that she had yet to uncover. It was during a quiet moment of reflection one evening that the realization finally dawned on her. The incident at the public restroom, the encounter with the off-duty officer. It had all been a catalyst for her transformation, but the real work of change had to come from within. With a determined nod, Karen resolved to explore this newfound understanding, to delve deeper into the root causes of her past behavior, and to find a way to truly, permanently transform herself into the person she knew she could be. As Karen's journey of self-discovery continued, she found herself drawn to the practices of mindfulness and meditation. She started setting aside time each day to sit in quiet contemplation, focusing on her breath and allowing her mind to settle. At first, it was a struggle. Her thoughts would race, and she'd find herself constantly pulled back into the whirlwind of her daily life. But with time and practice, she began to find a sense of peace and clarity that she had never experienced before. Through her meditation practice, Karen started to uncover the root causes of her entitled behavior. She traced it back to her childhood, where she had been constantly praised and coddled, never taught the value of delayed gratification or considering the needs of others. As she delved deeper into her own psyche, Karen realized that her sense of entitlement was a defense mechanism, a way of protecting herself from the feelings of inadequacy and insecurity that had plagued her for so long. With this newfound understanding, Karen began to work on dismantling her ego and cultivating a deeper sense of empathy and compassion. She started to see the world through the eyes of those around her, to truly consider the impact her actions had on others. And as she made this profound shift, something remarkable began to happen. The more she focused on being kind and considerate, the more she found herself feeling fulfilled and content. The anxieties and insecurities that had once weighed her down began to fade, replaced by a sense of inner peace and purpose. One day, as Karen was volunteering at the animal shelter, she encountered a familiar face, the off-duty officer who had intervened in the public restroom incident all those months ago. "Well, look who it is," the officer said, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I have to say, I'm impressed with the progress you've made." Karen felt a surge of gratitude, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's all thanks to you," she said, her voice thick with sincerity. "If you hadn't stepped in that day, I don't know if I would have ever realized how much I needed to change." The officer shook her head, her expression softening. "No, the credit is all yours. I simply gave you the push you needed. The rest was up to you." Karen nodded, understanding dawning on her. "You're right. This journey has been all about finding the strength within myself to be a better person." The officer reached out and squeezed Karen's shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "I'm glad to see you found that strength. Keep up the good work, Karen. The world needs more people like you." As the officer turned and walked away, Karen felt a sense of peace and purpose settle over her. She knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, but she was ready to face it head-on, armed with a newfound sense of resilience and a deep, abiding commitment to living a life of compassion and service. With a smile on her face, Karen returned to her tasks, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the unexpected catalyst that had set her on this transformative journey.